Is your loved one lonely? They may be, and you don't even know it. I'm Lisa Fausey, the owner of Home Helpers Home Care here in Martinsburg, West Virginia. The problem with loneliness is that oftentimes it's misidentified or not identified at all. And loneliness actually impacts our health much more than what we realize. For instance, the person with loneliness has a greater risk of 26% more likely to die early because it affects the health. In fact, clinical studies have shown that when a person that's aging is lonely and experiencing loneliness, they actually are more at risk for developing other diseases such as Alzheimer's. It actually affects the plaques that are in the brain, and then it increases that mortality by 26%. They've actually likened loneliness and the dangers of loneliness to being as damaging to the health as smoking 15 cigarettes a day. And, we've all seen the studies for years as to how damaging smoking is to our bodies. So just kind of compare it to smoking about almost a full pack of cigarettes every day when a person is lonely. So another thing that I've actually learned as I was studying about loneliness is that a person is actually 5 times more likely to need a coronary bypass when they're lonely. So it's kind of affecting our heart. We hear about folks that have a broken heart and how that affects them. And that broken heart sometimes is precipitating loneliness in our bodies. And sometimes as family members of an elder person, we don't necessarily recognize that loneliness. So today we're going to talk about some of the things that might actually help us to recognize loneliness in our loved ones. So the first thing that you can do whenever you're wanting to consider if you or your loved one is experiencing loneliness is to look at a few factors. First of which, do they live alone or do you live alone? Living alone is one of the greatest risk factors in being a lonelier person, and being able to know that that person is alone all of the time or most of the time, those are the folks that we tend to recognize loneliness in more often. Another factor is that puts a person at risk is, can they leave the home? Sometimes folks that are lonely, they find safety in their home, and so they're unable to physically get outside of their house. They find reasons that they can't leave their home. Maybe it's too difficult for their mobility. Maybe they have to rely on others for transportation, and so they actually begin to isolate themselves. So they're not leaving the house as often as what they used to leave the house to go for activities. Another factor in loneliness is actually being a family caregiver. So if you're one of those individuals who's caring for someone else in your family or your circle of influence, and you're finding that you actually have tendencies toward feeling lonely, that actually is one of the risk factors for loneliness, is being a family caregiver. Having trouble hearing. Did you know that whenever a person cannot hear clearly, that they tend to isolate themselves because it's easier for them to be in a quiet environment that they're comfortable with than to go into a crowd where maybe at church they can't understand what others are saying at a function. Maybe they used to participate in activities, and now that the hearing has been diminished, even with hearing aids, it can be a little overwhelming. The sensory, once they've added hearing aids, can even precipitate loneliness. So you have to really think about, when a person's not able to hear, what are they missing out on? And sometimes they would rather miss out on it and be lonely than to actually go into a situation where it's very difficult for them. So another risk factor for loneliness is having lost a partner, having lost a pet, or a major change in their life. Sometimes that major change can be that their adult children in their family had to move away for a job. Sometimes it could be that they lost their spouse or their significant other. Sometimes it can be that they lost a close friend, a pastor, people from their church community, and also losing a pet. The pets become really challenging for an older person to care for in their home. They also become a tripping hazard or a fall hazard. Sometimes the pets are older and they pass, and the person's not really able to get another pet because they're not able to care for them or take a dog for a walk anymore. So then that develops loneliness in that individual. So another at risk that we've noticed as well is living in a rural community. Oftentimes folks do not retire on Main Street. They tend to retire out in the country, back a long road, back a long lane. And And that creates a form of isolation in and of itself, which then again causes loneliness. You know, when you're getting ready to retire from maybe a government job and you go out into the hills here in West Virginia and you buy a nice home and it's up on the mountain and you have all that privacy that you didn't have when you lived in a metro setting and had to take public transportation to and from work. And now 20 years later, you're 85 years old and life is changing and your partner has passed. That really, really causes a lot of loneliness. And it really takes a special person to be able to continue to exist in that environment without getting lonely. So that is one of the next risk factors that we look at. And the last risk factor that I'll talk about is actually purpose. You know, each of us in life needs a purpose. When we're in our working years, our purpose is our job. When we're having children, it's raising our families and helping them to become contributing citizens of our society. When it's volunteering, we're out there working toward the causes that we believe in. But as those things get removed from our life and children go on to have their own families and work life is no longer a part of your life and you're not able to volunteer anymore, then again causes that feeling of loneliness and missing out on having really a purpose in life. And sometimes folks, as they age, that really happens to them and they have not had the ability to figure out, I'm 85 and what is my purpose for being here anymore? And I've had seniors express that to me in the past. You know, why has God left me on this earth so long? Why am I still here when I'm 95 years old or I'm 100 years old? And I have no answers for that, but they are seeking purpose in their life. And so not feeling like you have a purpose does create loneliness. To learn more about Home Helpers Home Care and how we can make your life easier, give us a call at 304-433-8000.